Hi, welcome to Petradot. And in this lesson, we are going to be talking about function parameters. Now, parameters are variables that are defined within the parentheses of a method. That is specifying the values the method expects to receive when it is called or invoked. So, for example, let's say we have our method as we discussed last time, public static void print name, right? And say this name is going to take a parameter strange name, right? So this is example of a parameter. So the parameters are actually the variables that you define within the parentheses, and they serve as a placeholder for the actual values that needs to be passed for the method whenever that method is invoked, right? So what it means is anytime we are going to call this method, we are going to call this method to take an action. It means that this parameter must have to be passed. So let's say we are printing out the name here. So if you check here, this is a void method, meaning it is not returning any value. So calling it, we are not expecting it to return a value. It's just for it to make a print on the screen. But then let us invoke this method and see, which is print name, right? So you see it's showing error here because it is expecting an argument to be passed, right? Expected one argument but found 0. So meaning is expecting an argument. So let's pass a string here, which is, let's say the name is Petra dot, right? So if we run this code now, let's see what is going to happen. You can see the name is printed on the screen, right? So the parameter is actually just a placeholder for the values that needs to be passed to the method when it is called. Then you heard me say argument, but what is argument? Argument is the actual value that is being passed to a method when it is called. Yes, at this point when you are defining this variable on the method, it is called a parameter, which is the placeholder, right? But at the point when you are calling the method and passing the value, the actual value you passed is what we call the argument, right? So now there's what we call the Java uses the pass by value in terms of, for example, let's say we have this method is meant let me okay this method is going to take a string. Let's say I defined a string here, string name equals to this, right? So and I pass name here. What this is saying is it is just copying the value of this variable to this. So it's just passing the value of this. So even if you update this name inside this method, this name never changes here. It remains the same. So the only thing you are doing is that you are passing the value to this method. So let's try, for example, I came here and say that name is not Petra dot, but is equal to John, right? So if we run this program, for example, now, and then okay, let me print out this name here and see system.out.println name, original name. Let's see whether this name that was passed here was changed. Remember that we called print name and passed the name here. So that name is already passed to this method here, and we came here and said that the name should now be equal to John, no longer Petra dot, right? So let's run this program and see. You can see we have John printed here because we updated it here and printed it. But when we printed the name on after the method was called, You see that the name remained as Petradot. It didn't change. So it means that it is only the value that was passed, right? Just a copy of the value that was passed. The variable never changes. This is only possible in primitive data types. But when it is an object that you are passing the reference, not really the value, right? You might not understand that now, but just know that you are passing the reference of the object. Hence, any change you make inside the method will affect the object, right? So, but when we are going to be treating objects, how to create an object of a class, you will understand it better when you are going to pass an object to a method. So, but just know that when you invoke a method and pass a variable to that method, what you're actually doing is you are passing a copy of the value of that variable to the method, right? Okay, then what is the return value? The return value is the value that the method sends back as a result to the code that actually called it, right? If you check here in this method, we say that it is void, that its return type is void, meaning it is not returning any variable that can be assigned to any existing variable this in code that called it, right? Let's say for example, as I called this method here now, there is no value it is returning for me that I can use to perform any further action. Instead, it is just printing a result on the screen, right? So that is why we say if it is void, it means it's not returning any value. So let's say for example, this method is meant to return an integer and it's meant to sum numbers and it should take two parameters, sorry, int a and int b. Then we'll come here and say return a plus b, right? So we'll call the method here sum nums, which is, we'll say that a is 12 and b is 13, right? If you watch here, you see that there is a yellow line under the method. What is it saying? Result of function parameters dot sum number is ignored, right? Meaning it has a result because it has a return type, meaning it's returning a value, integer. So, but since you are calling it without assigning it or not using it anyway, it means it's a bit useless calling this. Yes, it's useless. So it means it's expecting you to use the result of these sum numbers somewhere or assign it to a variable. So if we create int sum equal to, you see that the error has, the warning has gone, right? So if we now print our sum, you will see the results show on the screen. Let's see. You can see we have 25 here. So the return value is actually the value the method sends back as a result to the code that is called. All right. To recap in all we just discussed right now, we say that the parameters are variables that are defined within the parentheses of a method, which is this. These are the parameters. So they are the variables defined within the parentheses that specify the values that the method expects whenever you invoke that method. So if I should invoke this method here without passing this value, it will show an error because the method is expecting a parameter, right? Then we also say that they serve as a placeholder for the values that needs to be passed to the method. Then we also talked about the arguments, where we say that the argument is the actual value that is being passed to the method. So 12 here is an argument, 13 here is an argument. But at this point, A is a parameter, B is a parameter, right? So the actual value passed to a method is what we call the argument. Then we now say that the return value is the value the method sends back as a result to the code that called it. And that will be the end of this lesson. If you have any question or confusion, do well to drop it on the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.